Today we find out why my $4,000 editing system is essentially a box of hot RGB garbage, and why it's going in the trash in favor of this amazing all-AMD workstation. Looking to grab Windows at a crazy discount? Head over to scdkey.com at the links below and use promo code BPS25 at checkout to score a sweet deal on Windows 10, Windows 11, and Microsoft Office. Once you've completed your purchase, just click over to your user center, hit the green button to view your code, copy and paste it into your Windows activation settings, and away you go. Check out SCDKey at the links in the video description for Windows, Office, games, and more. Okay, so maybe that was a slight exaggeration. Of course, my editing system isn't actually fully terrible, but I have been experiencing a few quirks here and there recently. This, combined with the fact that I recently spent a week at CES editing on my all-AMD laptop, has convinced me that it's finally time to give Team Red another shot at capturing my heart as well as my desk. See, this is the 2022 model of the Asus Zephyrus G14. I was planning on doing a full review of it, given that it has some pretty powerful hardware packed inside. In fact, this version comes with a Ryzen 9 6900HS and a Radeon 6800S discrete GPU. While I'm probably not going to get the chance to put that video together, I did spend a good amount of time hunkered down in the dark corners of the Venetian editing on it, and I came away extremely impressed with its capabilities and overall responsiveness in the Adobe Creative Cloud environment. This is a bit unusual, as Adobe applications tend to favor Intel and NVIDIA hardware. But it got me thinking that I did want to spend more time in this ecosystem. Now, contrast that with my experience at home with this machine. This guy features an Intel i9-13900K, 64 gigs of memory, and a beastly RTX 4090 Founders Edition. It's extremely clean looking, compact, and by all measures, the top of the line when it comes to both gaming and editing. But recently, I've done my best to try to increase the production quality of my videos. And that means more accurate color grading, additional adjustment layers, denoising, and adding in things like motion graphics wherever possible. In fact, most of my recent GPU reviews have included charts that look like this, which may appear simple but actually require a good amount of processing power to render. When you have 23 separate instances of them in a review video, this top-tier PC bogs down to the point where it takes hours to spit out a final export. Literal hours. Not to mention the one time where it just ran out of system memory and crashed repeatedly while trying to handle a similar task. So I've got one great experience handling admittedly simple production work on a mobile AMD device, and one, I don't know, let's call it medium experience handling complex edits on an Intel and NVIDIA machine. Why not give AMD the chance to impress me further? And that is why I built this. Not only is it a contrast in hardware specs, but it's also a contrast in appearance. Let's talk about what's inside this box and what I hope to accomplish with it over the next month or two. I'll admit, I like the Fractal North. Well, I mean, that's really not a great secret. I did name it Case of the Year for 2022, but I felt like I wanted kind of a mirror universe type of look for this build as opposed to my editing system right now. So I swapped out the white North for this black version. This one comes with a heavier tint on the glass as well as darker walnut front slats and gold accents. So while the footprint and functionality of the case remains the same, it has a very different presence on your desk. I've populated it with some of the most powerful hardware on the market today, starting with the Ryzen 9 7950X. I did give some thought to delaying this project until the X3D chips are released, but that's likely another month away, and I wanted to get started on it sooner than that. The 7950X is the best that AMD can offer for video and photo production, and with 32 total threads, I hope that we can squeeze a lot of performance out of it. Helping to squeeze out the most performance from our power-hungry chip is going to be EVGA's new CLC X360. This is an Asetek-based 360mm all-in-one liquid cooler with an EVGA touch to it. A lot of companies are putting LCD screens on their pump tops these days, but EVGA has made theirs pretty simple looking, stylish, and easy to read. It can display up to 4 pieces of system info at once, which is what I tend to prefer rather than some crazy GIF action or GIF action if you're a weirdo. I did go back and forth on the motherboard for this build a few times, but ultimately I just decided to go all out with one of the most fully featured X670 boards on the market. We'll be using the Gigabyte X670E Aorus Extreme for the next month, and this will let me test out the long-term stability of this platform, as well as giving Gigabyte a try in my main system as the motherboard. Over the past few years, I've kind of been a slave to Asus for my personal builds, but Gigabyte makes some great products, and I'm hoping that this one works out. The memory here isn't going to be all that different from what I'm currently using. Even though I would have preferred to bump up the total capacity to 128 gigs, honestly, the reality is that I just don't have a bunch of 32 gigabyte DIMMs lying around for that use, and for the most part, 64 gigs should be sufficient. These are G.Skill's Trident Z5 Neo DDR5 6000 kits, and they have AMD Expo, which is essentially preset overclocking profiles for AMD platforms. And then the GPU is probably the most interesting aspect of this whole project. Adobe Premiere leans heavily on NVIDIA CUDA acceleration, and we won't be getting any of that out of this guy, the Radeon RX 7900 XTX. Still though, it has a massive amount of memory and memory bandwidth, as well as running with a sustained clock speed near 2600 MHz. Traditionally, AMD graphics solutions have been strictly mediocre when it comes to workloads like I'm planning to use them for. But with this generation, they actually made it a point to say that they've been working to improve their performance in more than just gaming. They introduced an AV1 encoder, and according to Puget Systems, have increased overall performance over RDNA 2 models by significant margins. This, combined with my experience working with the Zephyrus laptop, convinced me to give the reference model a shot in this build. I'll admit that while my time spent gaming these days is limited to mostly using my racing sim, on the occasion when I do decide to play an FPS like Halo or Call of Duty, I'm sure that the 7900 XTX can handle that as well. So what exactly is the goal here? I've replaced one overpowered machine with another one. I've gone from white to black. Is that really all? Well, honestly, it's just been a very long time since I've used an AMD system for my daily workflow. A few years ago, when the 5950X came out, I did have a build using that chip for a while, but it was supplanted by the 12900K pretty quickly. I did use Threadripper for a bit as well, but those systems were dismantled when I realized that I needed to physically downsize my equipment. The last time I had a system that used an AMD processor as well as an AMD graphics solution was this massive beast, which had two Vega 64s in it. I slogged through using it for a while until it literally blew up in my face. I got coolant all over my face. But to be fair, I didn't really enjoy the experience. So this is my all-AMD long-term test machine. My plan is to use it for at least a month while keeping this other system together as a backup just in case. I'll be using it for daily tasks, OBS recording, maybe some live streaming, video editing, photo editing, and gaming. I don't know that I'll have a scientific way of comparing my experiences, as I'm not planning on running any A/B testing. Instead, I just want to get an overall feel for how the system performs, where it excels, and where it lags behind. I've been saying for years that if AMD had a competitive graphics solution, that I would love to try it out in a build like this. Not necessarily because I need to, but because it will give me a greater depth of knowledge when speaking about certain products. How can I make proper recommendations without knowing how these things really work? This is my opportunity to really get a feel for how far AMD has come in the last few years. And honestly, I'm hoping that it's quite a long way. Now, I do want to address a few issues that popped up during the build that I haven't really heard anybody talk about just yet with this specific hardware. The first thing is the one main problem that the Fractal North has, and that is something that I commented on in my review video. It's the lack of appropriate cable routing holes above the motherboard tray. I think this can easily be changed for a V2 of this case, but the fact remains that with more complicated builds involving lots of power and or signal wiring, and with the proliferation of LCD pump tops that often have an octopus of cables emerging from their depths, there's just not enough room up here to send wiring behind the tray. So I took a step bit and punched a 3/4 inch hole through the back wall. allowing me not only more space, but also better routing channels to tidy up the final build. I'm also slightly disappointed with the EVGA CLCX cooler's LCD top design. The LCD portion of the product is actually a separate piece of hardware that clips onto the top of the pump housing using two plastic retention mechanisms, and then there is an electrical contact in the middle of it. For me, this was very, very unstable, and even when properly seated, did not want to stay in place. I wouldn't necessarily classify this as a huge issue, except for the fact that all of the wiring for this entire cooler is routed through this LCD panel. So it has the power connection, it controls the pump itself, and it also controls the fans. This somehow means that if the LCD screen becomes disconnected, the entire system shuts itself down. I'm not sure what crazy emergency failsafe triggers this, but I had a couple of times when I was just shifting the case around or installing the side panel and bumped the tubes when everything just all of a sudden shut off because I jostled the LCD screen enough to disconnect it. This needs to be improved. Now, I just threw this thing together last night, and while I did my best to install the relevant lighting control software and whatnot, I still feel that it's missing a bit of that classic BPS Customs flair. Specifically, I'm not entirely happy with the look of the reference 7900 XTX in this build, for the sole reason that it has red accents on it. Yes, this is the definition of picking nits, but I also do want the opportunity to try out some partner model cards. So I'll be trying to get a triple fan cooler design in soon, and I'll try to replace the reference card with maybe a Sapphire or MSI model, and that really shouldn't change anything performance-wise. Also, while these all black cables certainly fit the theme, I do want to get some that tie in more to the gold accents that are all around. So with those small details looking to be addressed, you'll have to check back in maybe a month or two for the final product. Let me know if there's anything in particular that you'd want to hear about when I come back in a month with a full report on how things went. Make sure to sound off in the comments down below, and also hit that subscribe button if you're curious about the results. Thanks everybody for watching, and I'll see you next time.